Good afternoon and welcome. Bienvenue et merci d'être venu en si grand nombre cet après-midi. My name is Victoria Dickenson. I'm an adjunct professor here with the library and collections at McGill, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon. I want to begin by thanking ROAAR Books and Special Collections for this wonderful opportunity to highlight Casey Wood and the Blacker Wood collection. I've been working with the collection now for about the last year and a bit, and it's just been an absolute pleasure, and I know you're going to enjoy learning more about it this afternoon. I'd like in particular to thank Natalie Wood and the library as well. I understand Colleen Cook is here as well, the librarian, Colleen? She will be, yes. I'd like to thank both Natalie and Colleen for their support and for the support of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in helping us with this afternoon. I'd also like to give special thanks to Jacquelyn Sundberg and her team. Jacquelyn's been the one who's taken care of all the logistics, as well as Anne-Marie Holland, who helped me organize all the displays. And I hope you do have a chance to visit the showcase, you will, and take a look at some of the treasures from Blacker Wood, some of which are also on the walls. We'll be talking about these. Today is an opportunity to explore the Blacker Wood collection that was created by Casey Wood. You're going to hear a lot more about him. I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to tell you a little bit of how the day will unroll. We're going to start off with an initial look at Casey Wood's work on bird vision, as well as his work in collecting that material from Sri Lanka, as well as Islamic manuscripts. Unfortunately, Anais Solomon is not with us today. She is ill, but she has kindly provided her presentation, and I will be reading it. And I'm going to apologize in advance for all my mispronunciations of the titles of the Islamic manuscripts. We'll have a health break at 3 p.m. and the washrooms, you have to go out ROAAR Books, down the hall, and the washrooms are at the end of the hall on that side of the building. So, on the left, thank you. Yes, you can't go right, so they're on the left. So, but that will be at 3, and at that time as well, I will be, for those who would like to join me, doing a small demonstration of Casey Wood's Introduction to the Literature of Vertebrate Zoology, which is on archive.org, so I'm going to be showing it on the screen. In the afternoon, we're going to look at building the Blacker Wood collection, and we'll have 3 speakers, and we're going to end with a reception, which we hope you can stay for. So, I think that's it. Christopher, have I forgotten any logistics? Okay. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christopher Lyons. Christopher is the head librarian of ROAAR Books and Special Collections at McGill and has been a great support. Christopher.
Well, I'm delighted to see everyone here today, and I'm just curious, how many of you are here for the first time, like here up in ROAAR Books? Okay, so just a small number of you. The rest of you are here because you got out of work, I guess. But that's okay. I'll just pretend you're really interested and be my usual enthusiastic self. The Casey Albert Wood's a fascinating person, and my job is to give you an overview of him. You will be hearing about his collecting work and what he's done for the university. I'm going to give you the context of him as a person. He's, I think, unjustly forgotten in the history of the McGill libraries. He's either not known at all, or he's known as the Birdman of McGill in part of his ornithological work, and I also think because of his initials, I think also doesn't help in terms of being other. Do I need to explain that? Yeah, thank you.
Gee, I worked there for 40 years and never thought of it.
Should I stop now?
Yeah,
okay. Let's move on, shall we? Okay. When he died in 1942, the American Journal of Ophthalmology said, on January 26, 1942, there died in California one who had created and occupied a unique position in the ophthalmologic and scientific world. Casey Albert Wood, student, practitioner, linguist, bibliophile, editor, traveler, author, friend. Now, this high praise gives you some indication of just what a passionate and busy dynamo this man was. he had, I think, at least two very, if not three, very distinct and very successful careers. Ornithology being just one of them. He was born in 1856 in Wellington, Ontario, to an American couple and his father was a practitioner, a general practitioner, very busy. He came to Montreal in 1874 to attend Bishop's University Medical School. Probably most people didn't even know Bishop's had a medical school. They did here in Montreal. Interestingly enough, it was the other medical school. It was the one where people who weren't able to get into McGill, i.e. they were women, like Maud Abbott, they were too Jewish, or other reasons. He went because his father had a friend there. So he graduated in 1877. But in his recollections, he had the great good fortune of getting to know a number of really stellar people in medicine from the Faculty of Medicine at McGill. He was the clerk of Sir Thomas Roddick, the man who the Roddick dates are named after, and also the initiator of anesthesia and antiseptic surgery here in Montreal. And he became a lifelong friend of Sir William Osler, then Dr. Osler, and the significance of which I'll fill you in a moment. In his unpublished notes for an autobiography, Some Recollections of a Long Life, Dr. Casey describes his early years in Montreal. So he graduated, he tried to set up a fashionable practice uptown, and found he failed miserably. But what he did discover is when he moved to Point St. Charles, a working class neighborhood, he had a tremendous practice and was busier than he ever thought he could be, mostly working with people in the railway. He was so busy sometimes he said he'd have 4 deliveries a night because physicians then were physicians, surgeons, and did everything virtually. And sometimes there would be days before he would even get a chance to change his clothes. So germ theory being what it was at the time, or not at the time, wearing blood-caked clothes is maybe not considered as gross as we would today. He married Norma Shearer in 1886. Emma Shearer in 1886. Oh, I am in trouble, aren't you? You're in the first row. And that concludes my talk. And so Emma Shearer was part of a wealthy merchant family here in Montreal, and her niece is Norma Shearer, who became a great, I think, silent film star. Please come on in. Now, they had no children themselves, by the way. So, working with railway employees created an interest in ophthalmology because there were a lot of eye injuries, of pieces of metal and shards of metal flying into people's eyes. He developed a fascination for this, so in 1886 he went to study in New York, Berlin, in London, ophthalmology, and he came back and reestablished himself in 1890. So, like his early years as a general practitioner, he worked very hard and developed a very lucrative practice, so money is not an issue with him. And being an energetic and curious person, in the scope of his career as an ophthalmologist, he publishes about 300 works. So, railway train, so referencing his early work and his early experience. He published several textbooks, including this one and this one. He edited an 18-volume mammoth encyclopedia of ophthalmology, and he was the editor of more journals than I knew existed in ophthalmology. And he somehow slept in all of this too, but I don't know how he did that. In 1917, when he decided to retire from private practice, the U.S. belatedly got into the First World War, and he was called up. He had been a reservist, so he joined the U.S. Army Medical Corps, worked in ophthalmology, and then was called to do the historical medical side of the U.S. Army study with the Surgeon General's office. So he was involved till 1920, and it's only then that he retires. So he moves to Pasadena, California, which sounds like a good idea to me, and he devotes the next 22 years of his life to his great passions of travel, ornithology, medical history, and book collecting, and he pursued this with his usual gusto. Now, ornithology had been a lifelong passion for him. He wrote about how, as a child, there were stuffed birds and live birds in, speaking of live birds, hello, Peter, in his father's house, and he had a great fascination with birds themselves, and also in the eyesight of birds, because they have such fantastic eyesight that he was curious to understand it in order, he thought, to see what is undeveloped within the human eye that we can transplant from our knowledge of birds' eyes. And in the same obituary I quoted from before, there's this wonderful description of him as a lover of birds. And the author says, as he would approach the cage in a zoological farm, he's approaching a bird cage, it was observed that a drooping, disconsolate individual, shrinking in the corner, would, as by magic, rouse itself and come fluttering to the bars, chirping and calling as it might have done had it been in its native forest. So, hyperbole aside, it shows that there is a real love and affection for birds, and it was reciprocated. Like his ophthalmological work, once he got interested in birds, it was full bore. So he published a number of works, dozens of articles, and including some significant monographs on birds as well. He was also named the Smithsonian Institute's Division of Birds collaborator. And that's one of the plates from the Fundus Oculi. At the same time, he was still publishing medical history, plus developing a fascination with traditional South Asian history. So once he retired, he traveled widely, and not in the sense of a weekend away in Plattsburgh, but months and months, and in some cases years away on these long voyages to the Caribbean, to Europe, to the Middle East, and to South Asia. So it was partially sightseeing, but it was also writing, researching, and collecting. And it's the collecting side I want to turn to for a moment, and just to say a couple of things about it. And this will be what I call the Osler effect, because I can't give a talk without talking about Osler. They had become friends when he was a student in Montreal. Osler was several years older. Osler, by the time he died in 1919, was probably the most famous physician in Anglo-American medicine. He was renowned not only for his clinical skills and his understandings of pathology and disease in general, he was also something of an inspirational speaker for medicine as a calling, a vocation, a way of serving humanity. He was also a medical historian and collected books on the history of medicine, as well as a way of preserving and then passing on the great legacy of medicine. And this had a profound influence on Casey Woods himself. They exchanged photographs, and I found this in the Ulster Library archives. It's signed to Casey Wood, and when Casey had sent him the photo, he said, "It's sitting on my mantelpiece in Norham Gardens." So this was not just some ordinary friendship. This was a strong kinship, meeting of minds. In 1941, Dr. William Willoughby Francis, the librarian at the Osler Library of the History of Medicine, wrote to Casey about Osler's influence on him. And in his response, Casey Woods wrote him back, talking about an encounter with Osler around 1899 or 1900. And Casey said, "My wife and I spent 10 happy days with the whole Osler family of 3 when we crossed the Atlantic together. I was encouraged to continue my omnium gatherum of bound books, manuscripts, reprints, letters, paintings, drawings, and so forth. But Professor Osler advised me henceforth to concentrate on ophthalmology and medical historical items, and not spread myself too thin over this and that, hither and yon. This advice, if you will include ornithology, I recognized as of the best, and I have since followed it as well as I could. But I think Casey would have even out-Oslered in terms of his collecting, because he was voracious. It was a wonderful time to be collecting. There was great material available. A lot of houses... That's my signal to knock it off. Okay, there was great time to collect. There was a lot of material available, a lot of after the First World War. Casey did it like Osler did, through auctions, book catalogs, book dealers, and this really excited me, which knows I really need to get a life. He actually, in this letter, it's from Sri Lanka, Ceylon was, he's talking about collecting olas. Olas are these usually religious texts that were done on palm leaves. And he says he got them from the priests or monks he collected them from. So he's going around buying them from the source, as it were. That's exciting because you usually don't get information like that. The other exciting thing is the letter's April 20th, 1925. So I thought it was only fated that's here. The original's in the case out there. So it's very exciting. His generosity to McGill very much mirrored Osler's. Osler decided to give his collection to McGill as a symbol of his dedication to the university and as a way for students to learn. So there are a number of gifts that are done also by Casey Wood. In 1911, he donates his collection of ophthalmological books and sets up a fund. So that would have been one of his books given to McGill. So this is contemporary historical ophthalmological works. Of course, in 1920, he found, and you'll hear a lot about this, the Sherwood Library of Ornithology, and that's the first book plate. He also convinces his friend, the Blackers, to found a library of zoology as well at the same time. And Casey Wood's rewarded with an honorary degree in 1921 at the Centennial Convocation of the university. He also gave material to others. Here's to the McGill Medical Museum giving material on South Asian historical history. And he also gave money to the libraries to purchase things, and he purchased things himself. He was voracious. And like Osler, whose Bibliotheca Osleriana, his bibliography, which was to be a sort of guide to the literature in medical history, published in 1929 by Oxford, Casey Wood 2 years later publishes this bibliography, which was meant to act in the same way in the field of vertebrate zoology. So great links between the two. So I end with this invitation. So like Casey Wood, I invite you all to explore our wonderful collections in Blacker Wood and all the other great collections we have, and we're always open for questions. You can email me or phone me or my colleagues whom you'll hear from as well, and we're delighted to help you. Thank you.